As Mark mentioned, I'm Rick Pereira. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor with the Ontario Ministry of Infrastructure. Just a little bit about myself before we get into it. I joined the ministry about a year and a half ago after about 8 years working in justice policy. So a huge step way outside of my comfort zone. Needless to say, it's been an extremely challenging year and a half, but it's also been really rewarding to be part of a portfolio so connected to innovation and technology that's changing so rapidly almost daily. Thankfully, I am part of an amazing team at the ministry, and some of them are here today, and I'm actually going to point them out if they don't mind, because it is truly an amazing team. So we have Ed Deng, who's our senior engineer at the ministry, and many of you may know him from telecommunications circles, and he's a bit of a broadband celebrity and a true champion in government for broadband. And he's joined by Amna Raza and Adrian Merdzan, also from the ministry as well. And together, along with our manager, Christy Kelly, we oversee the broadband portfolio from a provincial perspective. And we work with a number of ministries across government. They're also here today, some staff from OMAFRA or Rural Affairs, as well as Economic Development and Growth. And I will be joined by Michael Curri on stage shortly. Michael is the president of Strategic Networks Group. Michael and his team are known internationally for helping communities deliver broadband projects and maximize their broadband investments. And before I turn it over to Michael, before that, I just want to spend a little bit of time and emphasize the provincial commitment to broadband. Broadband and access to ultra high-speed broadband internet is a key priority in Ontario. Some of you may have seen the recent Premier's mandate letters to her ministers. In those letters, the Ministry of Infrastructure and the Ministry of Economic Development and Growth have been directed to work together to expand broadband infrastructure and improve connectivity across the province. This adds a clear level of accountability on the broadband portfolio, and we at the Ministry of Infrastructure are thrilled to see broadband elevated to such a high priority. This commitment is also backed by significant investment from the province. Since 2007, over $170 million has been invested to upgrade broadband across the province, with an additional $107 million for new broadband projects. This includes $90 million in provincial investment for the Southwestern Integrated Fiber Technology Project. Some of you may know it as SWIFT. When complete, this project will bring ultra high-speed internet to over 300 communities in Ontario. However, we know there is still a lot more to be done on this file, and we've heard a lot from various forums and policy tables that there is a greater need for policy support around broadband infrastructure investment. This has actually led us to partner with Michael and his team to further understand the econometrics around broadband, as well as develop a broadband toolkit for municipalities that will provide some technical assistance around some of the aspects of broadband and bringing broadband at the local level. I'm actually going to stop here because I'm probably cutting into Michael's presentation a little bit and turn it over to Michael to share some of the thinking and conversations we've been having at the ministry, as well as some of the work we've been doing together. Michael.
All right, thanks very much for that introduction, Rick, and I hope everyone has enjoyed their lunch. In terms of my presentation, can we get that pulled up? It was running smoothly until now. We have been, I've been doing this since 1995, this work on broadband and the issues around it. And as an economist, I was always interested in looking at, even back then, everyone knew broadband was good, but how good is it? And then the second question is, how do we accelerate that so that we realize those benefits that we're talking about today? The two questions that always come up in the work that we've done a lot of work across North America and internationally, is, one, who pays for it, which we'll get into, what those benefits are and who is aligned with those benefits. And also, what do we do about it to make sure that we're realizing those expected benefits? So, to start, I'll go into what those benefits are, some of the data that we've collected, to talk about impacts. We heard about that, especially the economic impacts, and then get into what to do about it. And the toolkit that we're working on with Rick and his team is part of that. So first of all, broadband means jobs. We've done a significant amount of data collection around this. It's responsible for on average 35% of all new jobs that are being created between 2010 and 2016 that we've seen, and actually it's increasing over that time period. And I want to thank Robert Bell, who's unfortunately not here in the audience right now, but for that setup, that plug on the on SNG, but also that setup on the methodology. It's actually pretty straightforward. We collect data from the individual businesses, organizations, and households, whether it's in a community, state, or a region, on how they're connected, how they're using that connection, and how they're benefiting from that connection. And the benefits include revenues, new revenues, cost savings, and new jobs. And we do that for communities, regions, states, federal governments, as well as some of the telcos. We've got a database of over 70,000 records from individual businesses, organizations, households. That micro-level data allows us to quantify that and talk about some of the benefits. And also some of the gaps and barriers, because what they also want to know is, where are the gaps? What are the barriers, and what are the opportunities for growth through broadband? Excuse me. So the first takeaway I want to share with you is the broadband impacts are driven by meaningful use of those applications, those online applications. We measure effective or meaningful use of internet on a scale of 1 to 10. There's 17 internet applications, from the basic things such as email and having a website, or surfing the web, to having a website, selling online, delivering those goods and services online, having collaboration tools. And what we're seeing with businesses is that, and intuitively I think we know this, but we've got the data to show it, that those businesses who are online are basically eating up the market share. Over 52% of their revenues are because of online activities. Those who are at a lower level of utilization, it's not even 30% of the revenues. So, I had a long conversation yesterday with an economist from the state of Pennsylvania, and he was saying, well, we really should be export focused, on the broadband, make sure they're up. Well, that's true. You want to attract as much, wealth creation into the community as possible. Getting people to buy, from the outside jurisdictions into your jurisdictions. But the issue is, if your businesses aren't online, they're not being found. And so what you have in your community is being, accessed in terms of a market from all those outside people. But your businesses can't access those outside jurisdictions. So it's a real challenge. And that's why not only do you need the access, but you need to show those businesses, what they can and should be doing to be competitive. The other, looking into that a bit deeper, what are they doing online? And why are they getting online, the businesses? And, increasing customer loyalty, reducing operating costs, reaching those target customers. That's key. It's so effective and so efficient to reach them. Looking at this, the glass full, half approximately of the businesses are looking at this. Looking at half empty, half the businesses aren't doing these things. Half the businesses don't realize what they could and should be doing. And I focus on businesses because that's the wealth creation of a local economy, of a regional economy. And that's the base, that's the foundation. If you don't have those businesses staying and growing, where's the future of your local economy? So there's an awareness that needs to happen about what you can and should be doing online. In terms of the jobs gained versus jobs lost, there's this concern, we hear about it, that when we bring in the internet, all this money is going to exit the local economy. They can go onto Amazon, for example, and buy these things. That's true. The data actually shows that for every job lost, there is actually between 10 and 15 jobs that are gained. We can go into those numbers a little more detail for you, and this presentation will be made available to you to share. But there are significant gains for all those businesses that we've seen getting online and doing these things to access new customers, collaborate with peers, and so forth. So to summarize, why broadband matters, I think a lot of us know this, but to sort of put it into some 4 key points, it improves the business competitiveness and leads to job creation and good paying local jobs, which is the knowledge workers we talked about. It's key for that business and retention expansion. And through broadband, that is really leveraged and possible, which then has enhances the quality of life. When you have that sustainable network now, you can add on all those quality of life benefits, especially what Doug McCullough is doing in Dublin. And it enables those smart municipal services. And so I want to now jump into, we know it's good, but we're seeing an underinvestment in broadband. And the challenge is, there's what I call a business case for broadband, which is the pure private sector play. The revenues have to be greater than the capital expenditures and the operating expenditures. We just saw Google Fiber pull out of further deployments and pause a number of them. They're going to continue on some of the existing ones. But if Google, with all that capital, is pulling out of these builds because of the high cost, making ready for the builds and so forth, and they're not seeing the returns. We worked in Kansas City, where that was the first Google Fiber project. Kansas City didn't even know what the take rates were for Google Fiber. Our job, when we were hired to do, was help those businesses that had access to Google Fiber understand what is possible and leverage it. But all those benefits to the community are off balance sheet to the Googles, to the private sector providers. Increased business productivity and revenues. Those good local high-paying jobs, staying local, that's off balance sheet to them. And those are benefits to the community that far outweigh what any revenue model. That's why it should be considered a fourth utility, as someone mentioned earlier here today. So, we've estimated what those impacts are. For example, the state of state, we've actually provided each of the 50 states in the U.S., we do a lot of work in the U.S., an impact announcement. We just completed in the summer a look at what is the broadband supply and demand across the state of Tennessee. We had 5,000 businesses that took the assessment and 18,000 households. Every county was represented. And if we had a program that was to engage those 3,401 businesses to better understand what's possible doing online and actually implement those things, the new revenues per business is about $63,000, and an impact of $10 million for a program that would cost $2 to $3 million. So huge potential returns in the first year, and really we've done that to help make the case of those benefits. We've talked about the ROI, return on impact, I think is a good way to put it. We all know the cost of building the network, and in isolation they're prohibitive. We wanted to have those states and those regions. We can actually do this for any county in the U.S. To have that counter argument to say, but look at the hard numbers in terms of tax benefits so that we can justify this municipal investment. Obviously, there's also social and other benefits to it, but in hard numbers, even this makes the Wall Street guys get interested. And so in Ontario, the challenges are 81% of Ontarians subscribe to broadband. Well, there's a gap there, but also broadband is 5 down, 1 up. In the U.S., it's now 25 down, 3 up. We're not competitive. It also matters what we do with it, and there's a lot you can do with even not so good broadband, but how can we expect to be competitive as a nation or as a region if we don't have access? I met Doug McCullough and his colleague 2 weeks ago in Columbus, and they were telling the story about how some of their businesses were competing against New York firms, but they don't have that high cost of being in New York. And because of their access, they can look like and act like one of the big players. That's fantastic, and that's a huge benefit to that local community. um, you know, with 25% of the local rural Ontarians having not having the download speeds that are needed to participate effectively, how can we compete? So, in terms of location, we hear it's how important it is. Well, here's some numbers around it. It's essential. 38% and 25% is pretty important. And in terms of staying, over half the response saying if we don't have it, we have to leave. And we see that. And the issue is, for the telco or the provider, with that $100 or $200 a month of that business leaving, it's a bit of a hit. But that community, those 6 jobs, those 11 jobs, not only is that loss of income to the community, if they have to move, because more than likely, especially in rural areas, there's no other jobs, but more importantly, those knowledge workers, what can they do? Where are they going to go? And so it really hollows out. So we need to ensure that we have it, and we all know that. Here are the numbers to help back it up and make those cases for that. So I'm going to move on now to the second takeaway. It's more than just the speed. We hear about gigabit, and it's absolutely fantastic to have that. But from the data that we have collected, we've done statewide data collections across 9 states. Fiber is obviously the biggest capacity. 56 on average download and about 28.3 upload speeds. You can see the blue and green. So fiber obviously is highly capable. Cable has come a far way because everyone asks us about the technology. Is there investment in fiber worth it? The fixed wireless is also impact. We're seeing though that the DSL isn't keeping up. But what we're really interested in is, and that's where the impacts happen, is that use, which is that gold bar. Sure, fiber is a bit higher, 7.23 than cable or fixed wireless. But in terms of where it should be, it could be so much higher. And that's part of the challenge. You have this great technology, you have this gigabit or 100 gigabit connection. What are you doing with it? Do you understand what's possible with that? And that leads to the question of why are we building these networks? And I differentiate the demand or that need because there's active demand. What is currently, how are you currently connected and what are you currently doing? Versus if you had better connectivity, would you sign up? And that's what that Google Fiberhoods process was. Hey, we're bringing in fiber, will you sign up for it? And if we reach 70 subscribers in this neighborhood, that's our go-to mark. But there's an even bigger piece, which is the potential demand. Most businesses, especially the small ones, don't know what they don't know. There's so many applications and new ways of doing things online that if they were to start doing it, all these things online, well, when they start that process, they're going to realize I need to have better broadband because this that wheel of death, as they say, that spinning wheel as you're waiting for that thing to load, or the collaboration tools, you're checking your inventory online, your sales thing. If that's going down, or if you're waiting for that, you're losing money, as so many businesses have said to us. And so, what does that represent? And if you can quantify that, those are those economic benefits that we need to target. The challenge is, especially with small businesses, they don't know what they don't know, as I mentioned, and we can see the numbers here. And that is actually exacerbated in rural areas where they don't have those networks of people. So it's a double whammy because small businesses, the owners, managers, they don't have the IT staff, let alone an IT director to drive change. The bigger companies are actually now leading it. But if you don't have that network of resources of people to talk to about this, you're also at a disadvantage. And so the challenge is getting to specifics about why this is happening. Is they're having higher priorities to focus on. It's the affordability of that expertise that they can't get into, can access, and that technical expertise, that knowledge to implement these things. So, to us, for the bigger companies, laissez-faire. In an economic development strategy through broadband, for those who are already taking advantage of it, fantastic. But as I mentioned before, the states and the regions that hire us, they want to understand, what are the gaps, what are the barriers, so that we're realizing those expected and potential benefits. And so these are the gaps that need to be addressed. And how do you do that? What we look at it is, one, you've got to personalize the value of broadband to those individual businesses, organizations, households. Households get it typically. If anyone has kids, Netflix and gaming, that's a big driver. Big organizations, they have the IT staff. But the smaller organizations, they need to be aware. And it's a process. I'll give you an example. As I mentioned, we did this at the state of Tennessee. How many people have heard of Chattanooga, Tennessee, the gigabit city? I mean, they've done a fantastic job of marketing, a great turnaround to the community. In the assessment that we took statewide, they ranked at the top in terms of speeds. No surprise there. In terms of the actual level of use, they were actually only 2% above the state average. And they had a gigabit networks, and that's factoring in also those at-risk and distressed counties that was our primary focus. So I actually had a meeting with APB, which is the utility in Chattanooga, and we're looking at how to address that with them. Another example is Opelika, Alabama. They spent $43 million on a network. There's something that came out a few weeks ago that says they only have 1 gigabit subscriber. Well, that's not to say that those investments aren't, they shouldn't have done that. They actually should. I mean, they look at the future, at why we're all here, but they're building for that future. But it's not just the build. It's making sure you got appropriate pricing policy, but also driving that awareness. And that's for us, what we've experienced, and we've been doing this for 8 years now, is one, get that business to take an assessment on understanding where they're at. How do you compare against your peers? Are you using those internet applications, such as, are you selling online? Do you have a website? Are you using social media? And if your peers are doing this, if 85% of your peers are doing this and you're not competitive. And show them what the ROI is, so they get that individualized feedback, an action plan on how to move forward, and ongoing support. And then you track it so that we can tell the story. The key to this is it has to be led by economic development, because that impacts, hey, this is a business retention expansion, keeps our businesses competitive. It's also a workforce, because those people who can help implement those applications, those are good paying local jobs, those knowledge workers that we're talking about. And so in personalizing the value of the business, help them understand the benefits of going online, to repeat, drive meaningful use, show them what that means, and develop a business case for them. That's got to be personalized. You can't just go in with general digital literacy and say broadband is good. It's what does it mean for your specific business. For example, there are applications that are quick to adopt, buying online, basic website. Those things are happening on their own. What we're seeing is the things that are slower to adopt, selling online, using social media. Selling online is more than just putting a product or description online. It's having the fulfillment process and payment process behind it. Social networking, how do I increase my revenues through Twitter? Actually, there are things that businesses are doing to do that, to draw attention to them. And here's the key thing. It's those slower to adopt and those more difficult to implement. From our data, that shows those are the biggest benefits. How do we help those businesses understand what that is? And so, in a regional approach, you need the broadband, to have the business be more competitive, create a demand for those high-skilled workers, which is the tax base, which adds to the fiscal revenues, and actually grows the market for the service providers. Because when you have these people doing these things online, there's going to be a demand for, one, there's going to be awareness of, I know why I'm doing these things online and what the value is. I'm willing now to pay that extra $50 or $100 for that internet connection that is higher capacity and more reliable. They understand the value. And when they understand that, that actually changes the business case for those private sector investors to say, look, we expected a 22 or 18% take rate in this community or the region, but because these businesses already are doing these things online, they understand the value. We're looking at 35, maybe north of 40% take rates, which completely changes it. So the payoff of all this, and this is a critical slide, we just released this last week, is that for those lower digital economy index, those lower levels of utilization, which is those gold bars, the new jobs, there are new jobs, okay, but those businesses who are doing things online, much more significant impacts. And that's what we want to achieve. So transitioning now to how to make that happen, Rick Pereira already went into what the province is doing in terms of what the investment in broadband infrastructure has been, and some of the tools that we're developing, as well as a commitment to access and connectivity in communities. What we're going to talk about next is, that toolkit. And really, it's a joint initiative of the ministry and the municipalities. It's an outcome of the feedback that they've received of how to make this happen. I think there was somebody who said, what do we do? Well, the toolkit is really, it gives you a holistic approach of how do you approach this. I think there's some great concepts and examples from the ICF in planning this, but really getting into the how-to and the holistic approach of answering the why and getting into some of those technical issues. That's what the toolkit is addressed. And it's really a progressive approach to leverage those the economic opportunities it creates. So the reason why we're doing this is to help those municipal and regional officials save time and accelerate the process, as well as those the political capital that is invested in this, to avoid the pitfalls. Focus on the right things. And the toolkit it starts off with an overview of the broadband and the impacts, defining goals and needs. What are the different models that are out there? Getting into a community readiness assessment. Are you ready for this? Do you have, are you doing things right, but are you doing the right types of things? Because every community is different. Their needs are different. Do you have the right stakeholders in process? And I think that's where ICF really adds a lot of value to that and helps, shape and move that process forward. And then also getting into the guides for implementation. And critically, answering the why, the case and benefits from broadband. I've shown you some examples. We can actually, look at those examples for a specific community or region by looking at, not only the business benefits, which we can estimate pretty accurately now because we've built this model, but also looking at the health, education, and access to government service benefits that are realized from broadband. And, evaluating the different dimensions for the current state and covering those needs. What is not only the current need, but also the potential need. So that we're focused on those outcomes and maintaining that focus. And so to wrap up the presentation, I'll then take any questions and I'll be around afterwards to answer anything. Is the how-to, how do we go about this process? As I said, I've been doing this for 21 years. I don't feel that old, but what have we seen in the work that we've done, not only across North America but internationally, is understand how to assess the broadband availability and demand, those needs, at a micro level. That's the demand. Coming in with build it and they will come, we've seen doesn't work. You have this huge debt. I think the Stratford example, really gave some numbers on that. But understand that and then build to that and prioritize based on strategic and impact-based planning. Use the tools that are available, to identify those gaps, barriers, and opportunities for growth. And those opportunities, when you look at those impacts, you can align those partnerships much more effectively. Hey, this is why you should participate. Here's the benefits to your group. This is why you should participate. What are the resources you can bring to help us with this process? And then design a network that only needs not just current, but also the potential. And from the data that we have, there's a huge amount of potential demand that is unrealized because they don't know what they don't know, especially in small businesses and even more so in rural areas. Help them understand what that is. Even for home-based, healthcare and education access and government access. That then grows demand and the benefits to the community and the impacts. And finally, find out what those tried and true services are to drive local growth and improve the quality of life in your community. So with that, I'll finish, and any questions, happy to take them. We do not. We would love to be part of that project, but I was in Alabama last week, and we launched a project which is looking at Northwest Alabama and 2 counties in Tennessee and 1 in Mississippi. It's a local development district where we're going to do a benchmarking, get a baseline of how they're connected, how they're using, and how they're benefiting from the broadband that they have available. And then in 2 counties where there's capacity with the Entrepreneurial Center and the University of North Alabama, we're going to actually, what I just described, work with those businesses, give them a scorecard, help them, understand what is possible, connect them then with the right resources to implement those e-solutions, those internet applications, and then we're going to track those benefits. And that's a project over 3 years. So I'm really excited about it because that's the first time that that's happening that we've ever seen. Maybe I'll hand that over to Rick. And I don't know where the mic is, but please, Rick.
I can share the podium. So back at the ministry, we are looking at different data sets and starting to collect some information across the province on speed, access, and affordability. That will take time, but it's something we are paying close attention to because we know that's a starting point from where we go from here, is looking at what Ontario looks like as a whole, where the opportunities are and where the gaps are.
Michael, right here.
Where's the voice here? Okay.
Great presentation. I don't want to muddy the waters, but I might a little bit. You know, we talk about fiber installments and getting direct connections to the home. What I notice at a lot of these things are we never talk about the mobile solution. So I live outside of a small southwestern Ontario town. I don't have high-speed internet. Luckily, I have a great data plan through work, which allows me unlimited data usage on my cell phone. So I've set that up as my home hotspot. And my IT manager came in one month and said, "Did you really run 170 gig through your cell phone last month?" So I'm just wondering, you know, if we were building a phone system in another country, we wouldn't build lines to every house anymore. You'd probably just give everybody a cell phone. Is that being taken into account anywhere, or are people just walking the fiber path?
A good question, and I mean, that gets into some of the technical issues. Well, I'll give a couple of examples to drop on that. Tennessee, 15% of Tennesseans don't have access to 25 down, 3 up, which is the FCC definition of broadband. Again, Canada is 5 down, 1 up. We're not competitive. We have a huge challenge. We have a huge geography, a lot of it very rural, some of it remote. I mean, we did an impact study of broadband to Nunavut. You know, so that aside, you know, at the very least, try to get fiber to those anchor institutions in the community. Get it as close as possible so you have that backhaul. Some of those, getting fiber to individual households or some of the businesses can be cost prohibitive. There are other solutions. So that's why the region needs to take ownership of that. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Google Fiber has pulled out of further investing. I mean, we all knew Google wasn't going to be everywhere. Well, don't expect it to come anywhere in the future because they're moving back and they're going to wireless. And to me, that speaks to, as I said, I think already, you know, even an organization that has the financial capital of Google is pulling out of this. If you're a pure private play, business play, there's better places to invest your money than into fiber. But if you're a tier 3 provider like in the US, where you have a vested interest in that community or that region, or if you're a utility or a municipality, you have a vested interest in that local economy in serving them. And so this is a utility play. In terms of the technologies that are offered, there's data caps. Not everyone has access to that kind of data plan. The challenge is how do we, you know, justify those kinds of investments because they are huge. It is a long term. We don't minimize it through the various technologies that are possible, but also look at, hey, this is not just a business case for investing. It's an economic case for investing, just like the roads, electrical grids, and so forth. So what we're trying to do is help shed some light on what those benefits are to justify that public investment, but also work with the private sector. You know, look, there's new demand here that has flown under your radar or that we've created through this kind of programming that changes your business case. How does that affect your business plan? You know, how many more people can you reach with the technology? Oh, sorry, this one, gentleman was next. Oh.
Hi, Michael. I think I'm on.
Yep.
Great presentation. Haven't seen you for about 15 years.
It's been a while.
Robert Lane and I usually do a tag team because we're the 2 oldest guys in the room. And he did a great one, but let me just throw a couple of things in. First of all, I'm Bill Hutchison. I'm the guy that created one of the world's leading community fiber infrastructures that's down on the waterfront. We just need some people to move there, and then they'd be able to use it, and you could come and tell them how to use it. But no government money. It only took 5 years. I was also the chairman of Canary, but more important to me is 10 years ago, the Intelligent Community Forum very honored me to give me their first ever Lifetime Achievement Award, and that was a great award, which I really appreciated, John and Robert. You made a great point, though. and I think we're glossing over it, and that is your point about the return on impact, and it's really coming to the community. And this is one of the big issues, and people say, candidly, why do the telcos and the other guys take so long to do all this stuff? Well, in the old days that Robert and I remember, when they were plugging in switchboards and doing long distance calls, they could charge enough to pay for the network they were putting in. So let's do more networks. Today, they can't get enough money out of a 20-minute into your home medical diagnostic from a doctor through your TV set to say that you don't have to go, Sonny, to the hospital or the medical clinic, because I don't think your arm's broken. We do kind of a Skype call over your TV, as they do in Sweden and other places. So they can't get enough return on that, but it's an economic impact. And that does argue for the fourth utility. Can you describe 2 or 3 of what you think are the best fourth utilities in North America that you've seen, where communities have really gone and done it, and they're getting a return? It may not be as high yet, but the top 2 or 3 that you've seen.
Well, there's a difference between, you know, the build, the access, or the supply side, what I call, I'm an economist, as you may have noticed, and then there's actual getting those impacts out of it. We have seen some great, you know, Chattanooga and Opelika, actually fantastic, you know, in terms of what they're able to turn around in their communities and make that investment. The question is, what are they doing with it? I forget the community in Iowa. You know, there's a couple of them that have really...
Something like Columbus or something like that?
Columbus too, obviously, and I'll speak to that. But in Iowa, they have over 70% take rate for their network. That's fantastic, because people understand what those is. Actually measuring those benefits, well, we haven't seen that. I mean, people are starting to get, you know, their heads up out of like the build, because it's a huge process and it's quite involved, a lot of technical things. In terms of, you know, oh, now what do we do with it, especially if they're not reaching sustainability revenues? Now they're starting to, you know, talk to us more about that. I really like, you know, Doug and I had a conversation last night, Doug McCullough from Dublin, Ohio, and, you know, what was, as I said, we do a lot of work in the U.S., and in Canada it's the same way as, often as well. You know, the telcos look at it, this is our turf. They're defending their turf. And so there's a big fight between, you know, the community who says we need better broadband and we're not getting it and you're not investing in it. But there's, you know, it's the never, never plan. And they're saying, well, we don't want to give up that potential market. That conversation needs to turn around to say, look, and it's happening in Dublin and in Columbus, where they're saying, look, we're going to build it because it's a utility, so to speak, and we're taking care of your backhaul. You should actually appreciate what we're doing. How can we work together here on this? And that's the conversation that needs to happen. You know, Kansas City was, you know, they got Google Fiber. You know, getting the economic development and small business development centers, you know, involved with helping the business now take advantage of it. That was a key thing. And there's other areas to it, but, you know, that's a more in-depth conversation. We got to cut off. I'm getting the sign to cut off. I'm around for...
Before you go, don't misjudge these people here about why Google pulled out. Google pulled out for economic reasons. They could not get the carriers to continue to carry it. AT&T and Verizon decided enough is enough, and we're coming after you. Look at Craig Barrett got thrown out of his job last week as a result of that because they changed their strategy. And there's new technology on the horizon. Google never came to Canada for one reason. You know why? Because the carrier said we would not carry you on top of the network for nothing. And there's the reasons.
In any case...
Don't confuse the audience that Google's no good or it's a bad way of going about it. It's not.
That's not the point I was making. The point I was making is Google was never going to connect every community in every region in North America. Not even they had the financial resources to do that. And even in the communities where they're going into, they're pulling back saying, we're not getting the returns we expect. For that reason, this needs to be a community and regional-based approach. This is infrastructure. This should be treated as a utility. That's the point I'm making. So thanks very much, everyone.